On the last episode of the Keepsake box, I looked at Antonio. He and I were both crying. He looked incredibly sad, but in a split second, the sadness in his eyes turned into horror. "What are you doing?" he screamed. My eyes traveled to the right. There Sharon stood, her face saturated with tears. My eyes traveled down, and I saw that she was holding a gun. The whole event played out in slow motion. It was like a theatrical event. Antonio and I both begged Sharon to put the gun down. In the coldest, most inauspicious tone, Sharon said, "You've taken everything away from me, Antonio. Now, I'm going to take everything away from you." It happened so quickly, yet so slowly. There was nothing I could do to change Sharon's mind. She wanted me dead, and a small part of me didn't blame her. I closed my eyes to prepare for the inevitable. I vividly recall every single second. I heard Antonio screaming, "No!" I heard the sound of the bullet leaving the chamber. I smelled the smoke. I felt the heavy sensation of something hitting my chest. I smelled the blood. I tasted it in my mouth. I felt it on my skin. I opened my eyes and saw the shock and sadness on Sharon's face. I heard her voice. I've replayed it in my mind so many times. She was crying and screaming. What did I do? What did I do? Sharon placed the gun against her right temple. She uttered 3 words. "You did this." She pulled the trigger. Sharon's body fell to the floor. I watched helplessly as each individual fragment of her skull separated from the one adjacent. I turned my head to the left, searching for Antonio. He wasn't there. I looked down and saw that he was resting on my chest. Bloodied and motionless, his body slid into the floor, a bullet hole prominently displayed between his eyes. It was in that moment that I realized something. Intentionally or unintentionally, Antonio had taken that bullet for me. I jumped into action. I started searching his pockets for a cell phone. I hoped that against all odds he could be saved. Antonio was wearing gray sweatpants. They were saturated with his blood. I searched his pocket to no avail. I slid my hand into his right pocket, and there was no cell phone. There was, however, a beautiful platinum princess cut engagement ring. My engagement ring. Chapter 24, Smile. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. Both Sharon and Antonio passed away that night. I handled the details and put them both away nicely. Many may wonder why I handled their arrangements. The answer is simple. I felt obliged. All things considered, both Sharon and Antonio had been good to me in so many ways. They both had selfish motives, but I couldn't ignore the contributions that they had made to my life. Taking her motives out of the equation, I owed a lot to Sharon. Not only did I owe her, but I still had a love for her that many people won't understand. She was tied to so many parts of my life. Sharon was tied to the first time that I actually felt pretty. I was forced to remember the first time she did my hair. I experienced a feeling that I hadn't ever felt before. She gave me the support that I needed to present myself in a confident manner. Additionally, Sharon was the first person to speak to me without judgment. She listened to me. She never made me feel insignificant about my thoughts and feelings. Sharon was the first person who told me to respect myself. She told me to demand respect from those around me. She was my first example of a confident, dark-skinned woman. She made me feel that I should be as well. I couldn't forget that. I often wonder when things had changed. Nothing in me felt that she wasn't a true friend in the beginning. I honestly felt that she loved me. So what changed? Antonio. That's what changed. I can't pinpoint the time, but I believe I figured it out. I was around a lot in the beginning. I like to believe that Sharon had a genuine affection for me. If I had to guess, I'd say that it was Antonio who planted the seed. That doesn't absolve Sharon of the part that she played, as Antonio wouldn't have been able to start the plan without her, but it was bigger than that. I understood it. Very few people will understand the force that Antonio was. You'd have to experience it. He was ruthless and predatory in most cases. But if he loved you, there wasn't anything that he wouldn't do for you. He could make you feel that there wasn't anything that you shouldn't do for him. That's the power that he held. Antonio could make you feel as if you were the only person who existed. He was loving and attentive in a way that made you understand how he felt about you. You didn't have to ask, you just knew. The look in his eyes told you. The softness of his touch told you. The way he held your hand, cupped your chin, or kissed your forehead. Everything he did made you understand how he felt about you. Antonio was the first man who made me feel wanted. He encouraged me to speak my mind, even when he was the target of my cross words. He allowed me to be free. I never knew what would anger Ken, but I always knew the end result. But Antonio was so easygoing. At most, he'd smirk and say, "Okay now, little girl." But he never raised his voice to me. He was the only man who never made me feel afraid. It was magical. He was magical. I had been on both sides of Antonio's favor, and that's why I understood. When you were good with Antonio, you'd do anything to keep that feeling. When you weren't good, you'd do anything to get it back. It was like a magnetic pull. No amount of pushing would suffice. He could pull you back at his will. I hadn't ever experienced that. It was a once-in-a-lifetime feeling that far surpassed any love that I experienced before or after him, even present day. I didn't just want Antonio. I needed him. Not financially. I needed his aura, his presence, his energy. His soul was connected to mine. His soul is still connected to mine. How can you experience that and not fight for it? I understood why Sharon's need for Antonio had caused her to betray me. It's the same need that caused me to betray her. It made her betray Cream. It made Cream betray Peaches. Even knowing everything, I would have betrayed anyone if I could have had him back, even for a short amount of time. How could I really be upset with Sharon? A month after the funerals, I was contacted by Antonio's lawyer. He said that it was urgent that we meet. I made the trip to his office, never knowing why I was there. I parked in a space in the very front and exited my car, the beautiful Jaguar that Antonio had purchased for me. I read the sign, the law office of David L. Herkowitz, Esquire. I thought about being there on 2 other occasions. The first was when Antonio signed his businesses over to me before he went to prison. The second is when I had to give them all back along with my bar. An extremely heavy feeling came over me. Regardless of the circumstances, I would have given anything to have those days back. I would rather have been anywhere with Antonio than to suffer the hurt of being without him. I pushed the tears away and went into the office. I didn't have time for a breakdown. Mr. Herkowitz greeted me and shook my hand. He proceeded to tell me that Antonio had left some things for me. I was surprised. He told me that Antonio's businesses had been distributed to his living relatives as he didn't have a living will and testament. He did, however, leave a handwritten letter for me. It said, "My sweet little girl, I want you to know that I love you more than life itself. I won't ever love anyone the way that I love you. If you're reading this, I can no longer fulfill my promise to take care of you forever. I won't burden you with my businesses, as we both know how that ended the last time. I did, however, leave a little something for you. I know that you can do this thing without me. Go to school. Do what you should have done, what I should have pushed you to do from the beginning. I'm taking the star out of my pocket. Shine, little girl. Love always, your Anemone." In spite of my best efforts, I broke. There was nothing I could do to stop the tears from flowing. After everything that we had been through, none of that mattered. Antonio's death left a gaping hole in my spirit that couldn't be fixed with the largest of patches. Antonio was gone, taking my soul with him. Yet I was still alive, a shell of a person with no soul. In that moment, I wished that Sharon had killed me too, but not brave enough to end my life. I had to go on. I had to go on, and I had to face the truth. Every single thing that happened was my fault. It was all on me. If I had turned Antonio away when he arrived the first time, he and I wouldn't ever have been. If I hadn't raced Sharon for Antonio, I wouldn't ever have taken her place. If I hadn't held my relationship with Antonio so closely, I would have taken Cassidy from Mom. If I hadn't ever started my own drug operation, Peaches wouldn't ever have stolen from me. If I hadn't started my own operation, neither Sharon's salon nor Antonio's club would have been burned to the ground, making it harder for Sharon and Cream to make a living. If I hadn't verbally annihilated Antonio at the prison, I wouldn't have felt responsible for Peaches' death. If I hadn't stayed with Antonio, it would have been easier for him to make it work with Sharon. If he had made it work with Sharon, they would both still be alive. It was my fault. It was all my fault. Inevitably, I had to arrive at a conclusion. In getting so far ahead of myself, I and everyone that I held dear had gotten left behind. I failed myself, Antonio, Sharon, Cream, Peaches, and Cassidy. How could anyone live with that guilt? And being the person that I was, it was impossible for me to have ever properly nurtured any friendship or relationship. It wasn't the nature of who I was at the time. I vowed to change things in the future. It wasn't until that moment that I realized how important relationships were. I went through everything alone, and I never, ever, ever wanted to experience that feeling again. Antonio left me $1.5 million. He also left me an insurance policy that far surpassed what I had paid for his and Sharon's funerals. I knew it would be difficult, but I decided that I needed to live my life in a way that would make Antonio proud. I had to. I sobbed throughout the entire visit with the lawyer. I needed to. I needed to release. I left the lawyer's office and went to a coffee shop down the street. If at no other point in time, that was the perfect day for sugar and caffeine. I approached the barista. "I'll take a cinnamon roll and a large coffee. Lots of sugar and lots of cream, please." I heard a voice behind me. "I'll have the same." I turned and displayed a stiff smile, the type you give when you want to acknowledge someone's presence without giving them too much attention. It was, however, the first time that I'd smiled that day. He walked up to the barista and told her to add his order to his. I told him that his generosity wasn't necessary. "You smiled," he said. "You should do that more often." The man retrieved the tray containing both of our orders. He walked towards the table and I instinctively followed him. The man and I sat and talked. I laughed for the first time since the day that Sharon killed Antonio. He made me feel relaxed, like some of the weight was being lifted. "Is there any way that I can take you on a proper date?" he asked. "Sure," I said. Again, I smiled. We exchanged numbers, and he agreed to call to see when I was free. I immediately knew that he was different from any man with whom I had previously been associated. What I didn't know is that he would become my next kin. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.